Hello everyone, Christina Werner here. Welcome to day 21 of the holiday card series. I'm going to be using the Joyful Season Turnabout stamp set from Concord and Ninth to create a couple backgrounds for 2 cards today. Now, when you use a turnabout stamp set, you also get this clear transparency guide that helps you line up your turnabout stamp in your MISTI. So what you're going to do is you're going to take the turnabout jig. The turnabout jig is a separate item that you purchase from Concord and Ninth. It's kind of like this kind of translucent 6x6 piece of plastic that has an X in the center of it and numbers in the corners. So I'm going to be using that to line up my stamp in my MISTI. And I'm going to show you in real time how I get this lined up so that you see how long it takes and how important this step is. So I have that transparency just sitting on top of the turnabout jig, and I'm very slowly and carefully applying my stamp to that plastic sheet. I'm lining up my stamp with the images that are printed on the sheet so that everything is in the right spot. And then I'm going to take the transparency sheet and it'll slide around inside my MISTI. I'm going to position it directly over where that X is on the turnabout jig. Now it's a little bit hard to see in my video, but there is an X that is etched into the turnabout jig, and I'm lining up the printed X on top of that X that's on the turnabout jig. And once I have it in place, then I'm going to close the door of my MISTI, and it's going to transfer the stamp and the transparency sheet over to the door of my MISTI. Then all you have to do is remove that transparency guide and you're good to go. I then taped, temporarily adhered some sea glass cardstock to the turnabout jig. There are marks on the jig that will help you align your A2 card front exactly where you need it in the center. And this makes it so that as I turn my jig and stamp in different colors, everything will be lined up just perfectly. So there's the first layer. Notice that there is a number 1 in the top corner of the turnabout jig. I'm using the color Juniper, stamping this down for my first color. I'm going to clean off my stamp and turn the jig over so that the number 2 is now in that top right corner of the jig. So clean off my stamp, and then I'm going to move to the color Grasshopper. I'll ink up my stamp with the Grasshopper ink, and then I can once again stamp down with that same image. So by rotating the image clockwise, it rotates it just enough so that the next time I stamp, everything lines up again. For my third color, I'm actually going to go to an even darker shade. I'm going to be using Rainforest. So I'm going to clean off my stamp. I'm going to take off all of that Grasshopper ink and rotate my jig so that the 3 is in that top corner for my third color. I'm then going to ink up my stamp with Rainforest to make sure that's inked up really well. And then I'll stamp down. And I think I stamped the Rainforest layer twice just to make sure I get a really solid impression. All right, the last color I'm going to be using for this background is actually Cranberry. It's a nice red shade. I'm rotating my jig so it's number 4 in the top corner, cleaning off my stamp, and then I'm going to come in with the color Cranberry. And even stamped on top of the sea glass cardstock that I'm using, I think it still reads very red. It's a really pretty color. I like having that sea glass in the background. It kind of softens the entire background. So here is the finished background. I did stamp that red twice. And you can see that everything is filled in, nothing's overlapping because I took the time to position my stamp very carefully on top of that guide and then also on top of the turnabout jig. So I decided since my stamp was in my MISTI, I might as well stamp another background. So this time I'm using the same sea glass cardstock, but I'm going to be doing all of my stamping in Versamark. I prepped the cardstock with an anti-static powder tool and then started stamping in my stamp tool. Now I rotated it the other direction this time. I just wasn't even thinking about it. It didn't matter which direction I went as long as I turned it in between each stamping. So I stamped all of that down in Versamark, and then my plan is to add some embossing powder on top so that I can do some emboss resist ink blending. So I've stamped all 4 times, and I'll remove it from that turnabout jig. I just use a little bit of temporary adhesive to hold the cardstock to that jig. I then sprinkled on some gold embossing powder. This is my favorite gold embossing powder. I've used it all throughout this year's holiday card series and probably the last 5 or 6 years of the holiday card series. This is the color Gilded from Brutus Monroe. They actually sell really large containers of their Gilded embossing powder. So that's what I bought, and then I just dumped it into this huge container. I use the Gilded embossing powder so often and so much that it's worth it to me to have a nice big container of it. I used my ink blending brushes and brought in a little bit of that Rainforest ink around the edges, and I ink blended all the way around, and then I decided I wanted the edges to be just a little bit more intense. So I grabbed my black ink pad from Concord and Ninth, and I just added a little bit of black right on the edges of my background. I didn't want to add too much. I didn't want it to overwhelm any of the color, but I love doing ink blending on the edges over embossed background patterns because it just looks so cool. The embossed areas resist any ink on top. It sort of protects the area underneath, and then you're left with the metallic embossed background. All right, so I've got these two backgrounds. I thought I'd pair it with a couple of dies from the Holly. Let's see, it's called the Jolly Holiday Dies from Concord and Ninth. They came out at the same time as this Turnabout stamp. So one of them says Happy Holidays, the other says Merry and Bright. And I decided I would have both greetings cut out of gold, but I would have their shadow layers behind them out of different colors. So for the Merry and Bright, I chose white. I thought that would stand out really well on top of that very colorful background. And then for the Happy Holidays, I chose some Rainforest cardstock. I thought that would kind of mimic the dark edges of the stamped and embossed background. So I adhered my gold greetings onto those shadow layers. This will give me something to put some foam adhesive behind when I adhere them to the cards. It gives it a little bit more of a standard layer to adhere. And I just adhered both of those gold greetings with some liquid glue. I'm using Honeybee Precision Glue for all of my gluing. Did not forget to dot the I on both of these. So I'm going to put a little bit of glue right above that letter I on Holidays and then move that little dot over on top. Okay, I'm going to set the greeting pieces aside for a minute and work on some other elements. I'm using my new A2 thin frames dies to cut out some gold frames for each card. And then I also used my favorite A2 Layers dies from Waffle Flower just to trim down the more colorful background. I thought it'd be fun to have a little bit of a different background on that. But for both cards from my A2 thin frames dies, I cut out both frames out of some gold cardstock. I then adhered the colorful background to the center of a white finished note card. And then I'm going to be adhering that gold frame to the outer edge. And this frame is cut exactly to an A2 card size. So it's just going to give that little bit of a gold edge to the card front. It's a great way to finish off a card, have a little bit of that metallic shine. So I thought I'd show you exactly how I adhere these. I do a very thin strip of glue right along the edge. I try to get it as close as possible to the edge of the cardstock without going off the edge. And I just put that glue all the way around. And then when it comes to actually adhering the gold frame to the card, I just line it up with the edge of the card, and I can manipulate that cardstock a little bit, make sure it kind of butts up against the edge of the card. It's one of my favorite things to do. I also like to add gold embossing powder to the edges of cards, and I do that just by running my Versamark ink pad along the edge of the card and then dipping it into that gold embossing powder. I then adhered the gold frame to the other card as well, using the same method, just a thin strip of glue around that outer edge and then pressing that frame down onto the card. So when it comes to that smaller inner frame, I have a favorite method for adhering it to make sure it gets on there straight and in the center of the card. I like to take the interior piece of the frame that I'm not using today, but I will just use it for placement. So I put some temporary adhesive on the back of that gold piece, and I put it in the center of the card as if I wanted to keep it there, but I'm just using it as a guide at this point. I'm using it to put on that glue right along the edge, and then I'm going to press my frame right on top and use it as, kind of puzzle piece that frame right on there. So the other way you could do this is put the glue on the frame itself and then bring it over onto the card. I just find that to almost be a little bit more messy. I find it easier to put the glue on the card instead of on the die cut. And then I can just lift up the corner of that centerpiece and very gently lift it off. And it's going to lift off a little bit of my frame, but the other 3 sides of the frame are adhered down at this point. So it's pretty steady and it's not going to move around too much. So I use that same method to put the other frame on the card, on my second card, put a little bit of glue around that edge, press down the frame, and then I'll just use my tweezers to kind of pick up that center area and pull it away from the card. And this one also pulls the frame just a tiny bit, but everything else was adhered down, so it was not a problem. Okay, so the last little part that I'm doing here, or what I thought would be the last of the card design, is to put some foam adhesive on the back of these greetings and put them on the front of the cards. And it was at this point that I decided, you know what, if I feel like it needs a little bit more detail on these cards, it just needs a little bit more. So I decided to grab my gift bows dies from my September release, and I cut out the bow and also the very thin strips. And I'm going to be adhering these on to make it look like the center frame area is a gift box. So I actually cut these pieces down into smaller little segments so that I could go above and below the greeting on this first card. And that's because I already have the greeting adhered. Then put a little bit of glue on the bow, and the loops on the bow were kind of overlapping the greeting, so I did not put any glue on those areas. I just put glue on the center of the bow and also the tails. And once everything is adhered, I love how this card turned out. It's so dramatic, and I love those pops of gold. For the other card, I decided to do both vertical and horizontal lines and then put that bow over top as well. So here are the finished cards. There's that one that's more of a monochromatic look with just gold and then those teal shades, and then the multicolor look on the second card. So those are my cards for day 21 of the holiday card series. I hope you enjoyed. I'll be back on Monday. I'll be live again on Monday night at 6 p.m. Mountain Time. I hope you'll come back and join me for day 22 of the holiday card series. Everything's moving along so quickly. Just something to note, because I did do mail call on Wednesday of this week, I pushed back the holiday card series videos by a couple days. So the series will now end a week from Monday on December 23rd. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys next time.